Maimer from Shavuos because the Shavuos Mamarim, there's many years in the starting from Tafshin Yud Beis through Tafshin Lamed when the Rebbe was still eating his Yom Tov meals in 770 upstairs. He said a Maimer Shavuos morning, like 3 o'clock in the morning. The Maimer last week's Dvar Malchus was a Maimer from the Shavuos morning of that year of Tafshin Yud Beis. And now we're going to learn the Maimer from the regular Shavuos Farbrengen that always took place throughout the Rebbe's Nesius at the end of Yom Tov, the second day of Shavuos. When the Yidden prefaced and said, we will do before we will hear, oh, so 600,000 malachim came to every single Yid, and they bound to every single Yid's head 2 crowns. One corresponding to we will do, and one corresponding to we will hear. It's known the question about this in many Mamarim. And also the Maimer of my father-in-law this year, meaning this year, even though the Frierdiker Rebbe did not say a Maimer in this world in Tafshin Yud Beis, but the Rebbe would give out Mamorim, reprint or print Mamorim of previous years. So in the Maimer that he printed, that Tafshin Yud Beis, which was a Maimer the Frierdiker Rebbe Tafshin Tez, the Maimer speaks about it. You can see my Maimer Chazal Mashma from the conclusion of the Maimer Chazal, it seems to indicate that the 2 crowns are for Nasa v'Nishma itself. In other words, 2 crowns. 1 crown for saying we will do, another crown for saying we will hear. Like he says, quite explicit. He says one crown was for Nasa. And he says another one, and the other one was for Nishma. As opposed to the beginning of the Maimer Chazal, indicates that the crowns are because they said first Nasa, then Nishma. It says, Nasa when the Yidden prefaced Nasa before Nishma. So therefore, what are the 2 crowns corresponding? Is it 2 crowns for the Nasa and Nishma? Or is it because they said Nasa before Nishma? The Frierdiker Rebbe explains in the Maimer Sha'adomas Nasa and Nishma Payelas the Nasa and Nishma Atzmum Shiyu Ba'ofen Naila Yosef, that the prefacing and saying Nasa before Nishma affects in the matters of Nasa and Nishma itself, that they should be high. So what does that mean? Then moving for this understood, that the giving of the crowns for the sake of the saying of Nasa and Nishma itself. It's only when they are in a manner of saying Nasa before Nishma. In other words, if Nishma would have said first, so then they would not have gotten crowns for saying Nasa and Nishma. Only because the Nasa came before Nishma, that is the reason why they were entitled and they were received the reward of receiving a crown for Nasa and a crown for Nishma. The idea behind this is in Nishma al derech Shema Yisrael, where it says Nishma, it's similar to Shema Yisrael. What does it mean, Shema Yisrael? As we know, many places of Siddur says that Shema is from the word understanding. It's something we need to meditate on. It's something we need to intellectually comprehend. Shuma l'shoin hasog is from the expression of comprehension and understanding. And what does this mean in the concept of Nasa? In the context of Nishma, inyan hasimas leiv b'chol mitzvah is it's the focus and the paying attention in every mitzvah individually and specifically. Hainu, this means sheyat liboy lishmoya v'lahakriv eichumahu rosna elim v'prati hamitzvahs. person should um, turn his heart to listen and to really hear how and what is the divine will in the details of the mitzvahs. And that is nishma, connecting and understanding and appreciating the divine will in every mitzvah. And nasa shulamaylam and nishma, when we say we will do, that is higher than nishma. Uhakabolas oil va'bitla prote retzoynes lishma kol rotzen l'kaim. That is already not about understanding the mitzvah and not investigating and appreciating and going through the details of what are the halachas and what do I have to do, but it's the acceptance of the mitzvahs upon itself. Yes, there's tefillin that has to be in such a way. I accept to do it. There's Shabbos, has such and such details, has to be done in such a way. I accept to do the will of the Eibishter in the mitzvah of Shabbos, in every mitzvah specifically. And even higher than Nasa, Nasa Nishma is the prefacing of Nasa before Nishma, top of the next page, to a Kabbalah's oil, it's the acceptance of the yoke of heaven and the bittul to the master of the will. Who bittul pnimi yoiser, it is a even deeper type of bittul. As we'll explain, it's just accepting whatever Hashem will say. We don't even know what the mitzvah is. When we talk about the nasa without the context of being before nishmasa, then we are accepting to do the particulars of the mitzvah. You told me to keep Shabbos, I'll keep Shabbos. You told me to put on film, I'll put on film. That is nasa without being prefaced to the nishma. That's just nasa standing on its own. Nasa before nishma is just like also in the simple sense of it. What's it mean, nasa before nishma? I don't even know what the mitzvahs are. I haven't even heard what the mitzvahs are. I trust you, Hashem. You, who is the master of the will, the source of the will. I'm not being mevat myself to the will, because I don't know what the will. I'm being mevat myself to you, the master of the will. That's what nasa before nishma is, my total connection today, beyond the details of the mitzvahs. So now he's going to work this through in the levels of the person's avoida. What does nishma mean? What does nasa mean? What is the bittul of nasa before nishma? So he says, "V'hefesh b'neim," line 2 on page 4. The difference between all these different levels, sheba'avoida the nishma avoida of we will hear liyoisa avoida shall become b'da, since there's an avoida that's based on reason and understanding and knowledge. Hari efsher, so it's possible sheyomer shmuazu na, but shmuazu chulu. It's possible he will say that this halacha is nice, and this halacha, etc. He doesn't want to finish the lashon. The Gemara says the opposite of it. That is the possibility when you're approaching it with your mind, because a person's mind works in such type of way. This I understand, this I appreciate, this is nice, this is good. Valkolponim, at least, even if he doesn't go so far as to say such a thing, though he will not actually explicitly say that this is not a nice thing, but in a more subtle fashion. It's possible that if a person's approach is based on the intellect, on the level of nishma, so there'll be a difference between mitzvahs that are logical to the mitzvahs that are super rational. That when it comes to the rational mitzvahs, he will feel a greater enjoyment than fulfilling mitzvahs that are super rational, that are beyond his understanding. So that is the level of nishma. The level of nishma makes and causes the person to be at a state where there's at least differences in his commitment to the mitzvahs. Then there's a next level. So too, even on the avoid of nasa, over there in nasa, the bittul is to the will. It's not a bittul to the master of the will, meaning tefillin, Yes, I'll do it. Shabbos, yes, I'll do it. In other words, you are accepting the particular wills of the Eibishter. Though his bittul is also to fulfill the mitzvahs that are super rational, call makom still in all, it's not the same as mishpatim, as logical mitzvahs. When it comes to mishpatim, he understands that he needs to fulfill it because the very nature of mishpatim, because it makes sense. So that's why that's the way he feels, and that's the way he connects to it. As opposed to super rational mitzvahs, maybe that in them he understands that he has to fulfill because that's the will of above. So again, when it comes to rational mitzvahs, don't kill, don't steal, honor your father and mother, he understands that it makes sense to do. So his mind is still involved in the process. True, he's buttoned to the Ratzon, but he feels that there is an advantage in the mitzvah itself. He feels the value of not killing. He feels the value of honoring his parents. But a mitzvah that's super rational, paradumma, shatnas, all he does it is only because Hashem's will. He doesn't see any value in it in and of itself. So there's still a subtle difference in mitzvahs when the bittul is only to the Rotz, not to the Baal. He says, the kivin sheklolos are bittul the nice wal pitam v'das, since the general bit of nasa has to do, after all, with reason and rational understanding. There's still some type of, like we said before, appreciation of the mitzvah itself because he appreciates. So, but by fulfilling, when he fulfills mitzvahs that are, I'm sorry, that's my place over here. When he fulfills the mitzvahs that are mishpatim, that are self-understood, and one does not need to dig into their Kabbalah's oil to do that, he'll have more enjoyment and pleasure than fulfilling these super rational laws that are not understood on their own. Through prefacing Nasa to Nishma, that's the idea of completely bottled to the master of the will. What does it mean he's bottled to the master of the will? Even before the will is revealed, he already is mevatl himself. He placed himself aside to the master of the will. So this affects also in the Nasa approach and even the Nishma approach. So there should not be any differences and distinctions between one mitzvah and another mitzvah. And that's like, but most lightest of mitzvahs and the most severest of mitzvahs are equal by him. This is what we were saying before, that Nasa Nishma itself may not have earned him a crown, may not have earned them the crowns, the Ksodim, but by prefacing Nasa to Nishma, by having the bittul to the Baal Ratzon, so now even his Nasa is in a different way, and even his Nishma is in a different way, that he makes no distinctions, and that's why he's entitled now for a crown for Nasa and a crown for Nishma. Goes on to give a marshal for this 26. Marshal just like a servant that's totally bottled to the master. He's not an entity for himself. So then it's considered for the servant a merit, a privilege, an honor to that if the master tells him to do a particular thing, he jumps at the opportunity, doesn't even care what it is. Without a difference, what the actual thing that the master is telling him to do, through this particular activity, through this particular command, the servant can fulfill the will of his master. Top of page Zai. So too, by prefacing and saying first Nasa and then Nishma, who are bit labalarotzen, that he's nullifying himself to the master of the will. But if in Shane Mitzias Lots Miklans Way, he's not a separate entity for himself whatsoever. Then there's no distinction and difference in what matters the will. In a avoided the Nasa and avoided we will do. Like we said before, he's bottled to the will. Tefillin, I'll do it. Shabbos, I'll do it. Kashrus, I'll do it. Shatnez, I'll do it. The bittul is in such a manner that the existence, my being, the being of the servant, is manifested in the fact that I have these jobs that I have to do for the master. It's not such a manner that he's not a separate entity for himself whatsoever. Ella, rather, his entire existence is to fulfill the will. Since he is an existence, and his existence is made up of the fact that he's there to fulfill the will. Therefore, there could be a difference by him. What matter does the will express itself? Does the will express itself in mishpatim and logical mitzvahs, like chukim, or does the will express itself in super rational mitzvahs, etc.? Only when the avoid is in such a way that he prefaces and he says nasa before nishma, and then he's bought to the master of the will. That means even before the will was revealed, he's in a total bit to the master of the will, in such a way that he's not an entity in existence for himself whatsoever. So since he is devoid of any type of mitzias whatsoever, and then there will not be any distinctions by him in what matter and in what aspect does Hashem's will express itself. As it's known, power of will is different than all the other soul powers beneath it. All the powers, like for example, the power of intellect, etc., come in and manifest in different aspects, parts, components. They're made up of different pieces. Therefore, when one detail is missing, so then the wholeness of it is missing. In other words, there's 99% of it, but not 100%. So if I have something that Seichel wants, that Seichel decides, that Seichel is interested in, if I have most of it, so I have most of it. There's something that I have, but I don't have it perfectly. As opposed to will, Chalchus does not come in a way that's dividable. Therefore, when one detail is missing, this is not the will. And again, we could see this, an example of pure will that's not mixed in with it any seichel. Let's say a child. A child, he wants to have, let's say, a cup full of whatever it was, a cup full of soda, let's say. And you gave him 3/4 of a cup. So he's not sad that he's missing a quarter of a cup, but he throws a tantrum and he doesn't want to drink the entire cup. Why? Because the rotten is the entire cup. He wants 100% full of his cup. You didn't fill up the cup to the top. I'm not drinking this at all. What do you mean? At least you have 3/4. Isn't 3/4 better than the whole? 3/4 is only better. I'm sorry. Isn't 3/4 better than zero? 3/4 is only better than zero if it is a matter has to do with the world of intellect. In intellect, 3/4 is better than zero. In Ratzin, 99.999% done is still not the will. We see this actually also in the mitzvahs themselves, that mitzvahs have details in it. And we say you miss one little detail in the mitzvah. And the person wrote, instead of a dalet by Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, he wrote a reish. Okay, he wrote a reish. Or just a yud in the Sefer Torah is missing, etc., etc. The whole mitzvah is gone. Why? The ratzon is all or nothing. Therefore, so this fits in with what we said before about Hakdamas Nasal and Nishma, line 23. Hakdamas Nasal and Nishma, Shua Bitl Bala Ratzon, prefacing Nasa before Nishma. And that's the bitl to the master of the will. What matters is fulfilling the will the way it is. Without any difference what topic the rotten is by Dezeh. And then there's, in other words, whether it's a rational mitzvah or it's a super rational mitzvah by Dezeh. So therefore, if he has the nasa before the nishma, he has the complete bittul to the master of the will. So then gam hanishma boy f'nayla yoser. Then even the nishma, because the nishma is intellect. Intellect demands divisions and differentiations. No, not if the nishma came as a result and following the nasa kodim nishma. How is that? Even when it comes to the understanding and the comprehension of the matter, so then the person's delight, the one that has the nas, that nas before nishma, his delight is not because of the understanding and the comprehension. Rather, his whole enjoyment is because fulfilling the will of the master of the will. And that's why the crowns for Nasa and Nishma were only given when it was Akdamas Nasa and Nishma. Connected Nasa and Nishma Asma. That's why the giving of the crowns corresponding to Nasa and Nishma itself is only through prefacing Nasa to Nishma. The Nasa and Nishma Asma affects an ascent, affect an elevation in Nasa and Nishma itself, that the Nasa is different and even the Nishma is different once he has the Nasa before Nishma. So that is why the crowns are given Echad Keneged Nasa, Echad Keneged Nishma. But it's only B'Shah Shehikdim. Once we said Nasa before Nishma, then the Nasa was worthy of a crown, then the Nishma was worthy of a crown. Any questions, please?
So there's no partial credit. It's either done 100% or it doesn't matter.
I didn't say there's no partial credit. I'm saying the ultimate way of fulfilling mitzvahs is in the way that it should be total devotion to the Eibishter. But there are mitzvahs that way that are no partial credit. If you have, let's say, 3 parshas in your film instead of 4, there's no partial credit. You don't have like 3 mitzvah done. You did not do the mitzvah of film. Okay, it's based on page Ches, line 6. But the Rebbe says That's fine and good. Okay, I understand the Hagdama being the one that causes the crown to come for Nasa V'Nishma. But shouldn't the Hagdama itself be worthy of a reward? Shouldn't the Hagdama itself be worthy of a crown? True. If there wasn't the Hagdama, if we didn't say Nasa before Nishma, so you're right. If we would have said Nishma alone or Nishma and then Nasa, no crowns for that. Fine, I understand that. Only when I said Nasa before Nishma, that's when I get a crown for Nasa and crown for Nishma. But what about the very fact that I said Nasa before Nishma? In other words, you're saying that the impact of the Baal HaRotzen is so powerful that it makes the bittul to the Baal HaRotzen, which is the expression of Nasa before Nishma, impacts the Nasa so greatly and impacts the Nishma so greatly that now I can earn a crown for each one. But shouldn't I be rewarded for that very bittul to the Baal HaRotzen itself? Not just its impact on the Nasa, not just its impact on the Nishma, the very fact that I chose to be bittul to the Baal HaRotzen, that should earn me a kes. Let's see the question inside. I'm not according to this when you understand. Since it is so great, the prefacing and saying Nasa before Nishma, that through saying Nasa before Nishma, the crowns were given for each one individually, for the Nasa and for the Nishma. So if it's such an unbelievable type of thing, there should have been the giving of the crown also for prefacing it one to the other. And by way of a kal v'chomer, how much more so? If for the result of the Hagdama, the quality and the elevation that now occurs to Nasa because he said Nasa before Nishma, and the quality and elevation that occurs to Nishma because he said Nasa before Nishma. Yes, there is the idea of giving the crown. So you're giving the crowns because of Nasa is so much greater now. Nishma is so much greater now. So obviously the thing that caused the greatness, how much more social tzarechly is in the sinus hakeser, there has to be the giving of the crown. Because of the avodah of prefacing the Nasa before Nishma itself, that itself should be even more so a reason to earn a crown. It came if so, tzarechly is in the sinus shloishik sarim. So we're back to the initial idea. There should have been given 3 crowns. Echad keneged Nasa, 1 crown for the Nasa, which is obviously a more elevated Nasa because it was said before Nishma. Echad keneged Nishma, and another crown for Nishma because again it was a much more elevated Nishma and deserving of a crown because there was a Nasa proceeding. And then ve'echad, and a 3rd crown keneged Hagdamas Nasa Nishma because of saying Nasa before Nishma. Why were only 2 crowns given? Only one corresponding to, and because they said Nasa, and one for saying Nishma, not because of saying the Nasa before the Nishma. Seemingly, that should have earned a crown as well. And here the Rebbe is going to bring in something that we learned in a Maimer the end of last week before Shavuos from Tafshin Mem Vav, where the Rebbe connects it. If you remember, I think I learned this Maimer with you guys, that it had to do with Parshas Kedoshim. Was it in our shir we learned about it? Trying to remember if I learned it with your shir or a different shir. It has to do with the 3 crowns of Kaddish, Kaddish, Kaddish. But either way, the Rebbe is going to connect that with 3 crowns that we are told in Chazal in a totally different topic, in a totally different idea, that is also connected with Matan Torah. And the 3 crowns, the 3rd one is actually going to be the one that we get for, or one that's caused through Akdamas Nasal and Nishma. Okay, we'll stop over here. See you tomorrow, Mert Hashem.
I have a question.
Okay,